Lesson 3, Section 2. In this presentation, we'll be talking about nouns, adjectives, and pronouns. We'll talk about declension, which is the inflection of nouns, etc., and some subtopics there. Then we'll turn to adjectives in Greek. We'll talk about the article. We'll discuss agreement. And then we will end with some discussion of different kinds of constructions in Greek. More on the Greek article and more on Greek word order. In English and Greek, nouns and pronouns are declined according to the following. Declension, of course, is the inflection of nouns, etc. We decline nouns and pronouns in both English and Greek according to number, gender, and case. Just those three things in both languages. And we are going to discuss each of these in turn. Number is an indication of how many of something we are referring to. In English, nouns and pronouns can be singular or plural. We have two numbers in English. Singular, the doctor tells me, and plural, I tell the doctors. Our noun here, doctor, has changed form when we have used it in the plural to refer to more than one doctor. In Greek, nouns and pronouns can be singular, plural, or dual, two in number. So if there were two doctors, for instance, in Greek this could be in a different form than the word for doctor singular or doctor more than two. Fortunately, the dual is rare in classical Greek. It's more common in Homeric Greek, for instance, older Greek. Gender is an indication of the grammatical class to which something belongs. Gender is, as we will see, not as cut and dry as an indicator of the biological sex of a noun or pronoun. It's more complicated than that, especially in a language like Greek. In English, pronouns are declined according to the genders of the nouns to which they refer. For instance, masculine gender, my dad works because he has to. The pronoun he is referring to my dad, and because my dad is male, the pronoun he is masculine. Fairly straightforward. Feminine, the white whale, thar she blows. Now, this is maybe a little less straightforward because I think we might refer to a whale as she, regardless of whether it were really male or female, just as we might refer to a boat sometimes as she. This is sailor speak, but you get the idea. Neuter, I had some money, but I spent it. Here the pronoun it refers back to the money, and the money is neither masculine nor feminine. It is neuter, so we use the pronoun it. We have declined our pronoun according, among other things, to the gender of the noun that it refers to. In Greek, nouns are also declined according to gender. So not just pronouns, but also nouns. In English, there's a very limited amount that this takes place. So with a noun like actor, for instance, in the feminine, it's actress. Some might say that is actually a different noun, and that actor and actress are different nouns, but they could also be thought of as the same noun, declined differently according to gender. We have a limited number of these in English, but in Greek, it's everywhere. There are two types of gender in Greek. So we have the three genders in Greek that we have in English, masculine, feminine, and neuter, but there are really two ways we get those genders in Greek. The first is called natural gender. This is where the biological sex of what you're talking about determines the gender. So male beings are understandably masculine, female beings are understandably feminine in Greek. But we also have grammatical gender. This is based on other mostly arbitrary factors, and it must be learned or deduced. Deduced, I say, because there are patterns, but until you've spent a lot of time with Greek, most of the time you just have to memorize them. And it's important that we memorize them. For example, logos, word, is masculine in Greek. In other languages, it might be different, because again, this is mostly arbitrary. For instance, in German, it's das Wort, that's neuter. So that's why these genders have to be learned or deduced. Case is an indication of how a word is functioning in a sentence. This is the last of the three aspects of nouns that determine how a noun is declined, and it is the most important and also the most complex. In English, nouns and pronouns appear in three different cases. We actually have cases in English. We don't think of them as cases, probably. We don't talk about them as cases, but they're there nonetheless. And there are three of them. There's the subjective case, I tell the doctor. There's the objective case, the doctor tells me. And there's the possessive case, the doctor is a friend of mine. Now, all three of these pronouns, I, me, and mine, are all referring to the same person, to the speaker. But they change form depending on how this word is being used. Is it the subject of the sentence? Then we put it in the subjective case, I. Is it the object, either direct or indirect of the sentence? If so, we change its form to me. Or is it the possessive object of the sentence? If so, it changes form to mine. Now, let's look at the full declension here of the pronoun I in English. We have singular and plural, of course, and we have the three different cases, subjective, objective, and possessive. I, me, mine in the singular, and we, us, ours in the plural. It's basically the same pronoun. And what we see here is actually a lot of variety. We don't see any ambiguity like we saw with the verb tell in English. And with pronouns, most pronouns in English, we do have a lot of variety and not a whole lot of ambiguity. There's more with the pronoun you, which is the same in the subjective and objective cases. So there's more ambiguity there. There's also a lot of ambiguity when it comes to nouns, not pronouns, but nouns. You notice that a noun like doctor in the subjective and objective cases is the same in both the singular and plural. So this here is quite a bit different from Greek, where, just as with verbs, we have lots of variety. Almost all forms are unique. Let's talk about the basic functions of cases in English. And we're going to do this for two different reasons. First of all, it's much easier to talk about case in a foreign language when you understand what case in your own language is and how it's used. And also, we will find that all of the functions of cases in English are present in Greek. Greek has more cases, but they're doing the same things as cases do in English. So let's look at the functions of the subjective case in English. First of all, the subjective case is used with subjects. I tell the doctor. Here, I, the pronoun I, the speaker, is the subject of the verb. Tell is the subject of the sentence. It's also used for the complement. It is I. So what we are saying something or someone is. And it's also used for addressees. So for instance, O thou my lovely boy. This is from something of Shakespeare's, I believe, a sonnet. And here, the subjective case is used for this address. Let's look at the objective case. We have direct objects. The doctor inspects me. I am the target of this inspecting that's going on. We also have indirect object. The doctor tells me a story. I'm not the direct target of this action. What is being told is not me, but a story. A story is being told to me. And sometimes using prepositions like to or for can help us tell direct objects apart from indirect objects. So for instance, we could rephrase the doctor tells me a story as the doctor tells a story to me. There it becomes very clear that the me is an indirect object of the action being described. But in both these cases, direct objects, indirect objects, we use the objective case. There's only one form in English, one case. We also have the possessive case, and this is used pretty much exclusively for possessive objects. The doctor is a friend of mine. We don't often see this in other situations. We still hear this, though. A friend of mine, a friend of yours, a friend of ours. It's of limited use, the possessive case, at this point in the development of the English language. Now, we just looked at all of these cases and the functions. These are basically the different functions, 6 different functions for 3 different cases. All of these have their equivalent in Greek. So to show the subject or the complement, Greek uses what is called the nominative case. To show the addressee, Greek uses what is called the vocative case. To show the direct object, Greek uses the accusative. Indirect object, Greek uses the dative. And possessive object, Greek uses the genitive. Now I put vocative and dative in red because these are basically additional cases, additional forms that Greek uses to do the same thing. And in English, it's much simpler. We've got 3 functions for the subjective case, 2 functions for the objective case, and 1 function for the the other case, the possessive case. In Greek, we have 5 different cases for these 6 functions. So there are more forms to learn. Now, let's look at some of these forms. We of course have singular and plural, and we have all 5 cases. I don't list the vocative down below in the plural because usually, and we'll talk about this later, the vocative is the same in form in the plural as the nominative. And we're just going to focus on the singular at this point. Just as we did with verbs, we're going to concentrate on the singular forms of basic nouns in Greek to start with. Now, let's look at a noun like logos. Logos, word, speech, or reason. Now this, again, just as we saw the basic form that verbs will be introduced in the readings in the previous lesson, we will see here the basic form that nouns will be introduced in the readings. So this here is the lexical form, logos. This would be the form that you would look this word up in the dictionary, the lexicon. And it happens to be singular nominative. This is the singular nominative form of this word. That is the lexical form. Just as the lexical form of verbs in Greek is the first person singular, the lexical form of nouns and other parts of speech is the singular nominative form. This right here tells us the gender of the noun. And tells us that gender. This isn't the word for masculine in Greek. It's actually a form of the definite article, basically the word for the. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. But this tells us that the word we're looking at is masculine. And this, of course, here is a basic translation. Quite a lot of variety here. Word, speech, reason. This is a word, an important word, both theologically and otherwise. And it has a pretty wide range of meanings. Now, we need to find the stem, of course, of this word, just as we found the stem for the verb in the previous lesson. And just as before, we have to drop something. In this case, we're going to drop the os ending to be left with our stem, log, and we are going to plug that in all of our slots, log, 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 log. And then we're going to add our endings. We know, of course, the singular nominative ending. We get that from the lexical form. It's going to be logos. But the other ones we're not going to be able to deduce. We just have to learn them. Logos in the nominative. Logu in the genitive. Logo in the dative. Logon in the accusative. Loge in the vocative. These are the endings added to the stem of this noun. And we have to accentuate this properly. And by the rules of persistent accentuation, we're going to get an acute on the penult in every case. So these are the forms in the singular of logos, word, speech, reason. Case in Greek. we have seen that the 5 Greek cases perform the same functions as the English ones. This is the chart we just looked at a second ago. Nominative, vocative, accusative, dative, and genitive. You will become very familiar with these. Let's look at some basic examples. The nominative usually indicates the subject of a sentence. For instance, halagos. I use blue here. I use blue throughout with nouns to indicate that something is in the nominative. I actually color code cases to help you see what's going on a little more clearly. And this is the word, or again, the speech, or something like that. And it is going to be the subject of whatever comes after this. The genitive usually indicates a possessive object, that is, of whom something is the possession. So let's build on halagos to get halagos tou teu. This right here would be still the word. That would still be in the nominative. It would still be the subject of the sentence. But we have here also a possessive object, the word of God. Tou teu is the genitive singular form of the word for God, theos, plus the definite article, which we'll talk about later. The important thing to see here is that this genitive is indicating that the word here belongs to God. The accusative usually indicates the direct object, that is the target of an action. Pa'al tanlagon. Pa'al, of course, is that verb that we saw. It's the first person singular form, so it's I. And another meaning that pa'al can have, especially in different contexts, is to close, not just to stop, but to close, to end, to bring to an end. So I am closing the speech. I'm closing the speech. Tanlagon here, green for accusative, is the target of the closing, the direct object of this action. Let's turn to the vocative. The vocative indicates who is being addressed, if it's made explicit. So for instance, te'e, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is a line from Matthew 27. And I put the my in brackets because we don't have the word for my there. Just on its own, te'e would mean something like God. And that is the vocative. The dative will be illustrated later in the lesson after this. We're not going to see any uses of the dative in the readings associated with this presentation. Adjectives in Greek. In Greek, adjectives are also declined. Now this is something we don't have in English. In English, our adjectives are not declined. There is a single form of an adjective in each of its degrees. So if we're talking about the adjective wise, it's whatever we're talking about, whether it's a he, she, or an it, whether there are many of them or there's just one, we're going to use that same form wise. In Greek, it unfortunately is not so simple. Fortunately, most adjectives are declined like nouns, so we get to use those endings that we just looked at. Unfortunately, they are declined differently depending on the gender of the nouns they describe. So if you're describing a wise woman, the form of wise is going to be different than it would be if you were describing a wise man. Gender, number, case, adjectives are declined according to the same things. So let's look at an adjective. Wise. Sapos, sape, sapon, wise. This again is the basic form that this adjective, that all adjectives will be introduced in the readings. What we have here is the singular masculine nominative, sapos. That's the first form. This also happens to be the lexical form. If you want to look this adjective up in the lexicon, you're going to look it up under sapos, the singular masculine nominative form. The second thing here gives us the singular feminine nominative form, and it just has the ending, so we have to supply the stem there. Sape. And the third is the singular neuter nominative form, sapon. And we're just going to look at the masculine form today, ça passe, wise. And we're going to look at it just in the singular again. But we do have 5 cases, just as before. So to get our stem, which we need to start with, once again, just like with logos, we drop the os, we get the sop, we plug that in. And as I mentioned just a second ago, many of our endings, usually adjective endings, are the same as noun endings. So our noun endings that we just learned were logos, lagu, this os, u, o, on, and e. We actually get to use those same endings here for the adjective. Now there's one little bit of difference here. The accentuation is going to be different because the base form of this word, ça passe, is accented on the ultima, and that is going to affect our accentuation here. We're going to get an acute on the ultima, and the nominative, accusative, and vocative, and a circumflex in the genitive and dative. For more about this, you can look at the handouts on accentuation. So these are the singular forms of the adjective ça passe in the masculine. We have not yet learned how to say that a woman is wise, or that a deed, for instance, is wise. That would be in the neuter. The article. In English, we use the definite article, the, before a noun to indicate that we are speaking of a particular member of a general class of things. So we're talking about a particular thing, but there have to be more than just one of this thing. For instance, the table is set. I'm talking about a particular table, not just any table, probably the table at my house, but also there have to be more than one table in existence. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to use the definite article. We wouldn't need it. It would just be a proper noun, probably. We use the indefinite article, a or an, sometimes pronounced a as well, before a noun to indicate that we are not speaking of a particular member. For instance, a table can be made of wood. I'm not talking about anything in particular. This table might not even exist. This is a generic sort of statement. Greek too has a definite article, a the, and like nouns in Greek, it is declined according to number, gender, and case. You're probably getting the impression that there's a whole lot of inflection that goes on in Greek, and there is. The definite article too, it's not as simple as just the. It's a different form for every number, gender, and case, and every combination thereof. This is the what you'd see in the lexicon if you were to look up the definite article in Greek. Ha, he, ta, the. Here we have the singular masculine nominative, just as with adjectives. So we have basically masculine, feminine, neuter. We see that for adjectives. We see that for the definite article. The definite article is, one way of thinking about it, an adjective. Let's once again look at just the masculine forms, ha, the, and once again just in the singular. Now we're going to start with something we just looked at, the forms of the masculine form of the adjective ça passe, wise. And we're going to take our endings, drop the stem, and we're going to modify these endings just slightly to get our forms for the definite article in the masculine singular. So the singular nominative is going to change from os to ha, which we know just by looking at the lexical form. We know that that's singular nominative. And for the genitive, dative, and accusative, all we're going to do is add a tau in front of the endings to get tu, tol, ton. And there's no vocative. So actually, this isn't too bad. And we're going to see it so many times in so many different forms that pretty soon we'll be able to recognize it and maybe even reproduce it without any trouble. So again, all of these mean the, but we're going to use one form rather than another, depending again on the case of what we're describing. Now, unlike English, Greek has no indefinite article. This is kind of a pain. Instead of an indefinite article, Greek often uses the noun by itself to indicate that what is intended is not a particular member of a general class. Compare the following: ha logos and logos. Ha logos is going to be the speech. We're talking about a particular speech. Logos is just going to mean a speech, general. It could also mean just speech, that is, the faculty of speech, the ability to speak in the abstract. So, two different possibilities really for that logos without the definite article. One of those, the more common, definitely, is one that we have to supply the English indefinite article when translating. Agreement. In Greek, articles and adjectives must agree in number, gender, and case with the nouns they describe. Here, agree simply means they must have the same number, gender, and case as the nouns they're describing. They must be, these may not necessarily be the same endings, but they must have the same number, gender, and case. They must be in the same number, gender, and case. For example, if the noun is singular masculine nominative, like logos, any article or adjective that describes it must also be singular masculine nominative. If it doesn't, then they're not going to agree, and there's either going to be an error, or it's going to be describing something else. Logos, speech or a speech. Ha logos is going to be the speech, but note that we have, once again, singular masculine nominative in the blue, and then singular masculine nominative in the blue. Hasapas logos, the wise speech. Note once again, singular masculine nominative. All three of these, definite article, ha, adjective sapos, and noun logos, agree. They all are in the same number, gender, and case. This has to happen in Greek for the meaning to be conveyed in a consistent way. Now, let's look at what this looks like, the full declension in the singular of this. Hasapas logos, the wise speech. Ha, we have the forms of the definite article here, and here the endings are using the color coding that I've come up with. Ha, sapos, these are the forms of the adjective, sapos, in the masculine. You can see that in this particular case, all the endings are almost the same. Logos. You can see we've got ha, os in the nominative, u in the genitive, all in the dative, on in the accusative, and in the vocative. There's only really one place in this whole declension where there's any difference in the endings, and that's right here. Ha is a little different than os, but still pretty close. So these are the forms, the full declension in the singular of the wise speech. That's how you would say it. It's complicated, isn't it? More on the Greek article. In Greek, the definite article is sometimes used where it is not used in English. It's just used differently. It may be used with proper nouns. So a proper noun, an example of this would be Zeus, for instance. We don't say the Zeus, but the Greeks often did. Ha Zeus, we would just translate as Zeus. We would never translate as the Zeus. This is different than the god Zeus. It's just ha Zeus, Zeus. Also, hateos is not the god, though it could be, but we also see it for God. And again, we would not translate this as the god if the proper noun God were meant. And really, with a word like this, only context can help us out. The definite article may also show possession, though this is very context dependent, so it's hard to give examples, but I'll give you a new word as well. Adelpos means brother. Ha adelpos could mean my brother. If I said ha adelpos, I'd probably be speaking about my brother.
If you said ha adel pas, I would probably translate that as your brother. So the ha here, the definite article, which agrees with the noun, might show possession, might actually be translated as a possessive adjective. My, your, her, etc. The definite article may also be used, it's very frequently used, in fact, with abstract nouns. So for instance, he pilia. Pilia is really the basic word for friendship, but if you're talking about friendship in the abstract, and usually you are, it's going to be he pilia. We would not translate this as the friendship, as any particular friendship, but just as friendship, the abstraction. Often with feminine nouns. The he, you notice, is a little different in form than the other forms of the definite article. It's because it's the feminine singular nominative form. He pilia. You'll sometimes see the same form of the Greek article repeated when the word it modifies is described in greater detail. This is known as the repeated article construction. Consider the following two phrases, which have more or less the same emphasis. Hasapas lagos and halagos hasapas. And in red here, I have the definite article. Note that it's basically just a repeat of the form of the definite article before. And these mean, functionally, pretty much the same thing. The wise speech. Both of these, hasapas lagos and halagos hasapas, both mean the wise speech. Now this is a handy sort of construction if you're describing something in great detail, but often, even if you're not, even if you could describe it in 3 words, you might still use for. More on word order. As with verbs, word order with nouns and adjectives, etc., is more flexible in Greek than in English. Let's look at this one. Hasdeus pau e ton logon. This, of course, hasdeus is in the nominative singular. We're talking about Zeus. Pau e, our verb there, is conjugated, third person singular. He, she, or it agrees with the subject there. So Zeus stops, or in this case, closes ton logon. Accusative, it's the direct object of the verb here. Zeus is closing his speech. What we might see is the same words in a different order. Hasdeus ton logon pau e. They're both going to mean the same thing. Zeus is closing his speech. And really, there's very little of a difference in emphasis here. These mean functionally the same thing. Hasdeus pau e ton logon. Hasdeus ton logon pau e. Zeus is closing his speech. Again, the ton, the form of the definite article there, accusative masculine singular, is being translated here. I've chosen to translate it as this possessive, this his speech. Literally, a translation of this might run something like, the Zeus stops or pauses or closes the speech. The Zeus closes the speech. But that doesn't sound right, obviously, so we have to do something more with it. Zeus is closing his speech. Sounds like much more idiomatic English and is not inelegant. Again, word order in Greek is not arbitrary. It's important to realize that, especially when your sentences get longer. For instance, if a word is placed at the beginning or end of a sentence, or is separated from the word or words it agrees with, it is being emphasized. We can do this in English as well. We can put a word we would not normally put in the beginning of a sentence at the beginning to emphasize it. So for instance, in English we might say, this often sounds fairly forced in English, but you didn't see me. We could, if we wanted to emphasize the me, we could say, me you didn't see. Now that's almost a kind of poetic word order, but we can do the same thing, and occasionally we do, especially in non-colloquial forms, in more formal contexts. Anyway, we see the same thing possible in Greek. For instance, pau e tan lagan has deus. This could carry the emphasis that Zeus is closing his speech as opposed to opening his speech. Let's say, for instance, that someone asked someone else, "Is Zeus opening his speech?" And the person might say, "No, pau e tan lagan has deus." Zeus is closing his speech. Emphasis often indicates that we are contrasting something with something else. So we've put pau e, the verb, at the beginning of the sentence to emphasize it. That's one of the possible ways of understanding this. Also, here we've separated our adjective sapon from the noun that it describes, that it agrees with, lagan. And this is clearly a non-standard word order. So we're really emphasizing the sapon. So what are we saying? He is closing a wise speech. Or we might even say, the speech he is closing is wise, or wise is the speech he is closing. At that point, it begins to sound a little Yoda-ish, but you get the idea. In English, we have different ways of putting emphasis on words. Word order is one of those. In Greek, word order is a very common way to emphasize things. Moreover, there are certain constructions in Greek that actually require certain orders of words. For example, sentences with complements. We saw what a complement was before. For instance, if you wanted to say, "It is I," that it is the subject, I is the complement. It's what you're saying something or someone is. Sentences with complements can be thought of as verbal equations where subject A equals complement B. Now, this is an important concept. We'll be talking about it again and again and again because a lot of language actually is basically saying that one thing is equal to another. I describe this as a verbal equation, and the subject is going to be on one side of that equation, and the complement is going to be on the other. For instance, the man is a philosopher. Here our subject is going to be the man. In English, our normal word order is subject, verb, object. In the place of that object, we're going to have a complement. The man is a philosopher. What is he? Who is he? He's a philosopher. The complement is what we're saying someone or something is. So A equals B, subject equals complement. The speech is wise. So before we had a noun as our complement, the man is a philosopher, but we can also use an adjective as our complement. The speech is wise. Same thing, A equals B, subject equals complement, a verbal equation. In Greek, word order alone may determine whether one is saying the speech is wise, subject equals complement, or the wise speech as part of a larger sentence. We already know how to say the wise speech. Hasapos lagos. Note that the adjective sapos is between the definite article ha and the noun lagos. It's between the two. This position is known as the attributive position, and an adjective in this position is known as an attributive adjective. It's a special kind of adjective. It's probably the most common kind. It's an adjective that attributes a certain quality to what it's describing. And we're not focusing on this attribution. It's not the focus of the sentence. The sentence would still make sense if we left it out. That is not the case with other uses of adjectives. If we move the adjective anywhere else, it is considered to be in the predicate position and to function as a complement. So lots of terminology, I realize. You'll see how this works. Probably understand it even without the terminology. So here we've moved the adjective sapos from in between halagos to in front of it, before it. And this changes the meaning of what we're saying. It actually makes it mean the speech is wise. Sapos halagos. We also could put that adjective after the noun, as long as it's not in the middle. as long as it's not between them, it's going to function as a complement. It's going to be in the predicate position. It's going to be a predicative adjective. Halagos sapos means same thing. The speech is wise. Sapos halagos, halagos sapos. Both mean the speech is wise. Note the omission of the Greek word for is, estin. This is a common phenomenon. In my English translation, I've put in parentheses the is. That's because we don't actually have a Greek word for it. We just have the Greek word sapos, wise, ha, the, and logos, word, or speech, or reason. We have omitted the appropriate form of the verb to be. This is a common phenomenon. We could make the verb explicit like this. The Greek doesn't have to omit this. It could use it. Sapos estin halagos. The speech is wise. We're saying the same thing. We've just stuck in the right form of the verb to be. Sapos estin halagos. The speech is wise. In English, such a verbal equation tends to take the form A equals B. That is, the subject comes first. And this is the result of English as being basically a subject-verb-object language. Word order is fairly inflexible. It's very important, and for that reason it's very inflexible. So, for instance, the speech is wise. We have our subject, A, equals our complement, B, wise. By contrast, the word order in Greek tends to be the opposite. That is, the complement tends to come first. Sapos halagos. We start with our complement, and we end with our subject. Now, because this is the tendency, however, just as we saw before, we might still say halagos sapos. So we would be saying the same thing with the adjective either before or after that noun phrase. So, if the adjective is just moving all over the place, and it could be the subject, it could be the complement, how do we know the difference? How do we distinguish between subject and predicate in Greek? Between subject and complement, really, is the term I wanted. Theos estin halagos. Theos, of course, the word for God. Estin is the word, is he, she, or it is, and halagos is the word or speech or reason. Does this mean God is the word? Or does this mean the word is God? This is a variation of John 1, of course, Gospel of John. There is a way of distinguishing whether a word is the subject or the predicate. And it's not just word order. There are two possible ways. One is context. If we've been talking about halagos a lot, and we say halagos again, we're probably talking about the word still, and not suddenly God. Also, the definite article. The definite article indicates frequently the subject of these little verbal equations. So where is the definite article here? It's right there, before logos, halagos. So the definite article here indicates that logos is the subject, halagos. The word is God. Not God is the word, but the word is God. There's a major difference in English between God is the word and the word is God. In Greek, one of the ways this is conveyed is by the presence of the definite article right in front of the subject rather than a complement. Note finally that in both English and Greek, the subject and the complement should always be in the same case. It is I. Both sides of the equation are going to be in the subjective case. It is I. In Greek, we don't have the subjective case, we have the nominative case. Theos estin halagos. Both the A and the B, or the B and the A, are going to be in the nominative case. Same case. That's the important thing. This rule, which is strictly observed in Greek, is often neglected in colloquial English. It's me. Here we have our subject in the subjective case, as it should be, but then we've changed to the objective case for our complement. That's probably confusing to learners of English, and it certainly is inconsistent. Although we're pretty consistently inconsistent with this. Anyway, it's probably frowned upon by prescriptive grammarians. Anyway, it's not something you see in Greek. The Greeks would have frowned upon something like this most earnestly. Now, for the forms of the things we've looked at, you can take a look at page 24 of the grammar for the forms of the definite article in the singular masculine. For second declension nouns like logos, we haven't talked about declensions, but logos belongs to the second declension. You can look at page 26. And for first/second declension adjectives that can be used with nouns like logos, you can take a look at page 32. And for further reading, you can read more about number and gender on page 10, more about the cases, pages 10 to 12, and more about the definite article on page 122. Thank you very much.